Hello everyone and welcome to the new chapter of INFS309. In this chapter we will be discussing about the email services in the web server, and we will be also introducing you about the variety of the protocols that can be running over the different email applications. Well, so throughout this chapter, beside these points, the mentioned points, we will be discussing also about the administration part of the email, uh, talking about like specific packages, like for example, specific packages for email, for enabling email services, such as Microsoft Exchange and also send mail for Linux. And beside that, we will just shed some light on how to configure email clients. So the first part here is to understand the email environment. So in the current email services, as you notice, or as you have been like reviewing, it is that the DNS actually it's being standardized in a way that like there is actually a file or there's a details within a DNS protocol that has information related to the to the mail exchange, or like information related to the way that how messages are being communicated. So this record is actually called a mail exchange record. So this actually enables a more flexibility to differentiate between the different protocols, particularly when we talk about like sending and receiving protocols. So that's why here we have three standard protocols that are being split over two categories. The first category here is for sending emails, of course, and the other one is for retrieving email. So it's about like sending and receiving emails. Um, Talking about sending, the simple mail transfer protocol, which is a very famous protocol, it's being used under this category. While talking about the other one here, we have actually two main protocols, which is the POP3 and then IMAP4. Throughout the advanced slides here, we will be discussing each of these in more details. From the other side, talking about like the email packages, the one that we were introducing in the outlines here, we have two main packages here like up to the date here. Although I believe that even there are even um, more packages that are being introduced in the domain, but these actually happen to be the most legend and the most currently and widely used. So talking about Linux here, we have SendMail, and Microsoft Exchange 2000 is actually being used in Windows. Again, I'm reminding you, so email packages here are actually a group of, these are actually, a group of applications or like a group of services which actually enable all these standards like in one single package without the need actually to for the user to configure each protocol in a separate way. So these are actually packages, and like these are tools or applications that enable the user to have a full board of the email services that he might think of. So it's not actually about the protocols, but even some, even a lot of features beyond the protocols here. But of course, protocols happen to be like the core building stone for these kind of packages. So like you can like think of it as Microsoft Office. So it is like a suite that enable a lot of applications to be integrated together so that it can be like like wrapped in one single software, or like in one single platform to say. All right, so email actually, like talking a little bit of history about the email services. So it has actually involved a lot of variety of proprietary systems. So either there is actually commercialized email services, or like some email services can be like freely available. Commercialized, of course, we talk about like Microsoft email services. So like talking about like some historical point here, like in 90s, between 90s and 80s, so people usually used to send mail addresses on a number of systems. Like little bit before that, actually, Exchange 5 was not actually there. Microsoft Exchange 5, even actually Microsoft was not even inventing any of their email packages to handle I mean, like the current mail services. So with that time, actually, it was just actually about the it was about like sending and receiving email from the I mean, like using an add-on that actually gives the ability to receive an email. So before this, in order for user to send an email, sometimes, I mean, like in the 80s, sometimes in order for user to send an email, he will need actually to go, I mean, like he will need to use a completely separate machine that enables him to send an email only, doesn't receive. So it's something like I mean, like ionic cast. I mean, like something like a one-way of transmission. So meaning that whatever machine here, or like whatever user computer here, um, it's only being involved in the process of sending, but not in receiving. That's why late in 1997, when they actually that add-on, when the add-on gave the exchange the ability to send and receive email over the internet from one single node. So common practice here, a company usually use many email servers that need to exchange message with a single server acting as a gateway. So meaning that here, like like each company, it's not necessarily to have one single email server. So it can be like a pool, or it can be like I mean, like multiple email servers are being connected together, um, and um, and having one email server of them acting as the gateway. Like you can like think of it like this. So having multiple email servers are being connected, multiple email servers are actually connected together to say, and then they're actually providing, let me just put them in like one simple order. So and they are actually both of them are actually giving a well, area. So here the fill should, let me add this, yeah. So like this. So at the end, actually, there will be one master, or not to say master, it's something like, I mean, like it's a kind of a gateway. So all of these are actually like a group of email servers. There are actually a group of email servers that are actually connected to like the gateway. So this is another email server that actually connects to, I mean, like to the internet, and then from the internet, of course, you can receive, I mean, like you can reach out the external users. So this is actually the common practice, or like the common scenario in different companies who are actually configuring their email services. Of course, this depends on the size of the company. Some companies may not need to have all, I mean, like may not need to have like a big number of email servers, or even to say some companies may only be in need of only single one email server. But like talking about like those mid-range companies, of course, this is the, I mean, like this is the situation to say. Well, so that's why. So here we need to understand that email servers can exist in like a group, while having like one of them acting as the gateway to the internet. So all right. So features here that can be existed in Exchange 2000 as like as one big variant of email packages. Um, as we understood that actually Exchange 2000 here, it is nominated as the Microsoft email package that provides different services, gathering protocols, the different protocols that we need, and also providing even different end user applications. So here we are getting to know, I mean, like some of these features that can be offered. For example, here and more. By the way, more exists on the textbook, so you can reach out there, I mean, like for more details and descriptions. For example, here you can see instant messaging. a unified messaging platform, a chat service which allows actually different users to perform a real-time chat and real-time sending and receiving of text based. And I believe all of these services are kind of really familiar, specifically these days when we talk about, like, you can imagine the Hangout example in Google. It allows such a, like such a service. It's just a plug-in. It's a plug-in. It's a plug-in feature within your mailbox or like within your email system that actually enables you to communicate with those contacts who are having the same domain. So URL addressing here, it's using a single URL to access stored data, and also collaborative development, and the use of MyMe here, which is actually which allows pictures and other multimedia media data to be converted into a text format. And this is actually very good and very kind of evolutionary advancement in the email features in order to facilitate the sending and receiving of even other objects rather than the text, by converting them, of course, into a text. All right, so here we talk about the role of DNS in email systems. So we have, like, for example, here the domain name, for example, uniswa.edu, for example, it needs to be associated with two IP addresses. So one IP address here should be for the website and the other IP address to be for the email. So meaning that we need to have an email server and we need to have a web server. So here and some other examples that say like the same, I mean, like this is a kind of example for the email address, or like for an email that belongs to, I mean, like a specific company or like a specific association. So this part here, xyz.com, it actually represents the email server IP. And also in the same time, because you see, like whenever, I mean, like when you want to search for that company, you can just simply, most likely in most of the cases, you will need to write www.xyz.com, for example. Okay, so this actually also brings, I mean, like it brings that you are actually accessing, this indicates that you are accessing the same IP address. All right, because here, this is the IP address that you're communicating with the server, with the email server. Okay, xyz.com. So it reflects the IP address of the email server that this user, in which this user is connecting to. And if you have taken that part, xyz.com, and pasted on the URL space in the internet browser, of course you are actually visiting the same, I mean, like you are using the same IP address there. So here, how to differentiate between these two? Because like in some scenarios, and I believe that not only in some scenarios, like majority of the current email, I mean, like majority of the communication over the internet now, it requires that I mean, like both email and web server IP addresses have to be differentiated so that different users can, I mean, like can distinguish. With that, we use what we call a DNS. So, and here the role of DNS happened to be significant. So now DNS services, it is used in order to differentiate between, I mean, like it is used to differentiate between the email server IP and the web server IP. In the scenarios that, I mean, like in the scenarios where the like the user account or like the accessing domain happen to be the same domain. Like for example, we are talking about like XYZ here as a single domain that has been used for email server IP and web server. So how is that possible? It is that a DNS file should be associated, should associate the domain, which is the host or the host name, with the IP address of an email server. So this file is actually called mail exchange. That is actually short for MX. So an example of the record here. So this is a file. A file actually contains many records. So we call this as one record. So each line in the file, it contains one record. And this file actually existed in the DNS server. So example here, uniswa.edu, and then in, which indicates the flag, whether in and out, in or out. And then this is the actually the I mean, like the flag to say, or like this is another flag that actually can be used to indicate whether I mean like I mean like that this kind of line, it is actually an email, it is an email based configuration here, okay, or it's an email based rule. So number 10 here, it is actually referred to the priority of email server if there is actually, if there are actually multiple email server. So here, of course, the I mean like this is the default, by the way. So default in most of the configurations happen to be in 10. So of course the lower here is the highest priority. Okay, and this is actually the name of the email server. All right, so talking about the email system terminology, we have three main entities, or like three main agents here in order to enable the communication between the sender and the receiver. This picture may actually illustrate, this diagram may illustrate better understanding um, for the process in order to, I mean like for sending for the sending process to say between the, I mean like a user A here, for example, and then receiving it from a user B. So in order to make this kind of communication, we have to configure three different agents. So each of these agents, of course, they are being configured in different places. So like the sender and receiver, most likely they have a similar agent that it's actually called a transfer, mail transfer agent, or actually short for TA in some cases. While actually in the middle here, we usually used to have a mail transfer agent, and the one server here that it's actually near to the receiver, that it's actually connected nearly to the receiver, or directly connected to the receiver, it has actually a functionality that is called mail delivery agent. Okay, so let's just have like some points here, going through some points in here. So talking about like mail transfer agent here, it is the main, actually the main agent to say, or it's one of the core agents, because it accepts email from clients and then forward them to another MTA. They are not actually meant for delivering, rather they are actually forwarding and I mean like receiving or accepting and forwarding. For example, here Exchange 2000 and SendMail, they do have actually this kind of agent. Agent here, it can be like a software, or it can be like a kind of an application that has been built in within I mean like that, I mean like the server, the email server package that you're using. For example, Exchange 2000 or SendMail. Another one here is mail user agent, and it's actually this kind of agent here. It is kind of simple because it actually doesn't make any processing. It only makes a gateway, or it only uses it is only linked or configured with a port, a specific port. Okay, that actually depends on the protocol that is being used, whether I mean like to be SMTP or any other protocol, or like POP or IMAP for, as we will be seeing later on, to retrieve, in order to retrieve or receive. For sending, we use SMTP. Okay, so I mean like all the things that that kind of agent is doing, it is actually connected to that port, and then sending to the email server, and then the email server here in this case processes. So examples of that, so using the email agents here, or the email clients. So for example, I mean like these are examples of email clients, and we will be talking about both of them later on in the slides. So we have two variants here, Outlook and Kmail. Mail delivery agent here, it's a part of email. It is just a part or a portion of email server application that actually delivers email from the email server into the end user. So for example, here Exchange 2000, of course, because you can see that here it has both abilities for transferring and delivery. Okay, so here it's just a function, or it's just like an extension or a plugin that actually can be activated or deactivated. It depends on actually the server, the kind of configuration the server is being configured with. All right, so let's just put this in order, and I mean like start it like this. I mean like started, but I mean like imagine that we have a sending scenario, or a communicating scenario between the email client and the sending email client and receiving email client. Let me just before starting the explanation or like or gathering all these kind of points, let me tell you that this kind of diagram is really important and really critical, particularly in most of your assessments. You'll be actually, you should be able to, I mean, like put or like draw a scenario and describe how is this communication is happening. Of course, as you're expecting here, the process starts from the sender, and this is the receiver. So the sender here um, actually the sender here is actually sending an email, like it forms an email message having its IP address and it is email ID, and also the receiver ID, and also the contents of the email with the title. Of course, it's connected to a particular port that it's actually SMTP. Okay, so SMTP usually connects to port 25, and then it actually send it, I mean, like outbound that email and that email message into the email server, the nearest email server that it's configured to the sender. Okay, so in the email server here, it actually uses the MTA, which is the mail transfer agent, in order to forward that message into another server, because we are assuming that the receiver here is kind of a remote user, not necessarily to be within the same domain that actually the sender is. Okay, so it actually here what we said is that we use the mail transfer agent in order to traverse this kind of message between the different server. Could be one server or like more than 2 3 servers. Depends on the I mean like in the geographical distance between the both end users. So when it reaches finally at the nearest email server that actually the receiver is connected to, that email server actually activates its mail delivery agent service or application in order to send by name or send by like the IP address for forwarding that message that has been received from the other servers. And then finally the I mean like the email client, the receiver, it activates or it uses its mail user agent um, to connect to that, I mean like to that port by using the I mean like the kind of the any kind of protocol from those protocols that has been used for retrieving or receiving emails. And we will be talking about like both of them. There are two, commonly POP3 or IMAP4. So IMAP4 and POP3 are being activated here in order to retrieve the email and then finally reads the contents. So this is basically the I mean like the description of that scenario. I would like you to really understand it and to be able also to I mean like to re-describe it again in any of the assessments. All right. So again, here we are actually continuing in the terminology of the email system, talking about like explaining some concepts. And I will not be explaining these literally like line by line, but I will just be lifting you, going through the textbook, and of course guided by these points, and explain these kind of things. But I mean like what I will show you is that I will just be discussing the idea of each one. So masquerading here, it's about replacing an actual name with a different, I mean like with the domain name. So here it's just like to cover or hide the personality of like the internal user here. Talking about relying, it is to send an email on behalf of the main sender. All right, so it is happening like this. So instead of having me as the end user sending an email by my name, I'll be like connecting to an intermediate server or an intermediate node. And that intermediate node, of course, it's an email server. Most likely it uses its ID to send an email on my behalf. And actually we need to be careful in this kind of situation, because if it happens that that intermediate node or intermediate server is being infected or is being hacked, so of course all my messages here, because they are being blindly sent to that node, uh, thinking that it's kind of safe and this is the default way out to I mean like how to reach out the other destinations. Of course my data will be breached, and I will be threatened for like the security issue. So it should be allowed from from the internet, because the spammers here could use it as, of course, as a malicious code. All right, so talking about spammers here, they are the ones who are sending unwanted emails. So these spammers are people who do not have an identity, or their emails are not being authenticated by the same domain we are connecting to. Like, for example, we are connecting to your home or your work place. Of course, you should be affiliated to a specific domain and validated by that domain. Whatever emails that you are being received from a user that doesn't has any relation, or like that doesn't have any kind of validation from your own domain, of course they will be identified as a spammer. So spammer here, the spammer address here often is masqueraded, so which is actually hidden, that actually appears to be someone else who is sending to you, not the real person. Alias. It is actually an email address. It is actually a very good terminology here. It's a very good, very important or very essential kind of concept here, whereby an email address is not actually related to a specific user, but email addresses are being sent to to a general actually to a general email address. For example, here you can see, so when we say like info@Unizwa, for example, here. So what we meant by this email is that we are changing we are creating a kind of another email that it's actually being typically forwarded. Whatever emails are being received to that account, it's a very legitimate and very valid account, but it's just an account that doesn't belong to any specific user in personal. Rather, it is just a public account, but belongs to that organization. So this account is being used to, to forward whatever messages, or to send or receive whatever messages from that account. This actually will make it kind of easy for users, for the public users to reach out this email, rather than reaching a particular user. And from another side, because you see, for the long-term use, later on, let's say if person X, he is actually administering whatever messages, whatever letters are being received from that account, from the info, and he has been lifting his position. Later on, another user is coming, so that user can continue the work in the info by simply linking his email without doing any further configuration, but just simply to link whatever real email that he has, or personal email from from his work. You can simply link it to the public email from for that company, in order to control and administer the messages. All right, so talking about email protocols, the ones the ones that we were describing in the terminology here just a few slides ago. So here we talk about three different three main protocols. The first one is related to resending emails, and both of the other two, POP3 and IMAP, it's of course for receiving here. And you need to know that, of course, whenever sending an email, meaning that that protocol should listen to a specific port. Of course, different protocols having different port number, although even for both POP3 and IMAP4 are doing the same process, or are doing the same purpose. They are meant to be for the same purpose, but rather, of course, each of these have different ports, all right? Because the functionality and the way how they process is actually different. In the ethics and the methodology. All right, so MTA here depends on SMTP. So talking about SMTP, it's of course because it's a sending email, so it's a sending email message service. So of course it uses the mail transfer agent here. So remember this. So MTA here, it actually depends on SMTP. All right, so talking about POP3 and MAP4. So POP here, typically all messages are downloaded, and we will be talking about this in details. So there are actually some of differences between these two that happen to be in the same category. And so here we talk about typically all messages are being downloaded to the client's side, or they can be left. But this is an option that the user can activate. Talking about IMAP4. IMAP4 here, it is another huge email address actually that actually brings more functionality and more kind of details over the POP in terms of receiving. So you can create folders, and you can have some subfolders within the same folders in order to hierarchically manage and store your email. So MDA here uses either POP or IMAP. So MDE is being used in POP or IMAP4, while the MTA is being used for SMTP. All right, so talking about the first protocol in the list, so it is a text-based protocol, SMTP, and that an email client and users use usually. So it depends on the text actually. So headers here, there is actually what we call a header. So it is actually a component in the SMTP that actually indicates or add a descriptive information. Of course, how do we interact with SMTP? By using commands, which are actually divide the SMTP communication into kind of distinct part in order to facilitate administering them and later on also to configure them easily. So these are some of the commands that you can actually see, particularly not that much. So for example, hello without with a single L here, it is to identify sending an email message. So it is something like ACK. It's just sending a signal that indicating that the next hop or the next receiving the server is actually alive and can receive a message. So the other one here is data. Actually, you can just go through the others. So data, for example, indicate the body of the message. Verify, VRFY here typically. So it is to verify the user email, and then quiet ends the SMTP session. It's just very easy and summative. Well, these are the SMTP headers and that have actually description to all of them. You can just go through them all, and you can just simply review what each of these mean. And they're actually very straightforward and doesn't have any kind of mysterious description. Like for example here, mail from these identifying the sender email address, or the sender identify the sender and the receiver here message, and both of them, of course, they are actually mandatory. So receiving identifies the email server that processes the message. So who is receiving the message in order to process it? Because here SMTP, remember that it actually works. Just a few slides ago, it actually works here, not here. Okay, so it works between different servers. So servers are sending to another servers until it reaches to the end destination. Okay, so again, you can just go through the rest here too. For example, and CC, it is to copy, and also BCC here different is to allow whoever is being listed in the BCC, who will not be able to see the sender displaying the email addresses that has been communicated, only seeing the body of the of the email. So this is the simple session here that you can say. So for example, using the different commands. So for example, hello. WKS1, this is the sender host name, and this is the receiver domain. This is the receiver domain, and then here talking about the IP address of that domain, and then OK here indicates that the connection has been initiated successfully. And this is the sender domain name. Sorry to say that, I was confused. And this is the receiver domain name. And here is actually the data that comes in. And notice that these two numbers here, the 250 and 354, they actually indicate, they are actually codes by the email server in order to determine the response type, whether to be, a control message or to be a data message. All right, so talking about POP, it is more simpler than IMAP4 that we will be studying in details later on in a few slides. So at first, actually, the first step here, it needs or requires the user to send a password and username. And before actually starting into this point, let me just remind you, add this, add that kind of hint in here, is that when we talk about SMTP, is actually these kind of details, whenever they are being communicated here, they're actually not being verified. So meaning that any user can actually pretend to be the receiver, and SMTP will accept that. So it means that SMTP, it actually lacks of a verification process, and you can actually find these details in the textbook in more descriptions. SMTP here, whenever it sends, it doesn't really verify who is the sender and how can we authenticate that he is what he claims he is. So this is actually kind of a limitation point here. So because also doesn't require any login. So now POP3 tries to add some functionality, although POP3, as we said, it is actually the receiving part, not the sending part of the email communication. Although, so POP here requires the, like a username and password in order to like to make that kind of authentication. So the functions that are provided here variety, like for example, list, read, download, delete emails, and so on. So message are download here. There are two options that can messages be handled in the email. Like to be retrieved from the server. So either message downloaded from the client, from the server into the client side, or like our messages are being here we are talking about completely downloading them, meaning that having a full copy of that message while deleting them from the server, or messages may remain at the server but not downloaded to the client. Of course, the second option here requires the client, or requires the user, to have a on-time and consistent kind of online connection to the server. So again, there is another feature for POP3 that it's actually unlike the IMAP4 later on that we will see, is that POP is actually a good feature for slow connection. Why is that? It is actually because of that particular reason. It is that because it uses, like POP3 uses what we call headers in order to allow viewing the subject, only the subject and the title of the email, without without the need to download the full size of the message. So this is, of course, if you have a slow connection, if you have like a limited kind of disk in your system, in your computer, that will be actually a good choice for you in order to to run that email agent to retrieve messages. Okay, so like SMTP, of course, POP3 has commands, and as we said, so these commands allow more manageability and more controlling for the different processes over the email. So you can just go through these commands here. For example, the username and password, so it connects user and username. So here user is the keyword, and username here, whatever username is you're having. For example, Ali Ahmed AOP XYZ. Password here is the password using the command pass. List is to list the number of message, and UIDL, it is also another listing but with a unique ID here. All right, and so on and so forth. You can just go through them. Like for delete, and here it specifies the it specifies the number, specifies the ID of the message. All right, so here, and actually it indicates the ID of the message, not actually the number of the message. All right, so here these are the symbol of the commands. They are not actually the process. I want you to notice this, numbering these commands from 1 to 8. This doesn't mean, or from 1 to 9, this doesn't mean that this is actually a procedure or a sequence of a process. Rather, this is just an example of how each of these commands is being implemented or manipulated there. So for example, here when we say list, so plus OK 404 here, it actually indicates the number of characters that we are actually listing, meaning that the size of the text we are listing. And here, this is the ID of the message. It could be message 1, message 2, 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, so from here, of course, this is the email from the receiver, from the sender. And also delete 1 here, it indicates, for example, the number of the message has been deleted. So whenever we press enter, so plus OK indicates that this command has been performed successfully. Okay, so the plus OK here usually indicates a successful execution of the different commands. Again, I'm saying these are not sequential, and the order here is not important. Rather, I'm just indicating that there is a list of commands, so they are not actually does not necessarily to be to be following each other, but this is just to indicate what is the example of each one. So more details you can read them out in that textbook page 13 to describe the POP commands. All right, so the process here, this is the process as what we said. So the session here begins with the email sending, begins with the email client sending the username and password to the email server via those two commands here. And you need to notice one thing here is that the sending and like the method how these two kinds of data are being sent is that using a plain text. They are not actually being encrypted, and this is actually one of the critical limitations for POP3 that it's actually not recommended whenever we talk about like highly secure places of email systems. So then the email client here either uses these two commands, either of these two commands, in order to retrieve the list of the message. Of course, we want to retrieve them, and then after this we read, like whatever, or like a particular message, we can read it by, by invoking its message or its ID to say. So for example here, UIDL, it's a unique listing. It is a unique ID listing, meaning that we are listing message by ID. So here also we can actually, with UIDL, the client software can track which email message have been read, and those are actually not has been read. All right, so talking about IMAP4, it is actually to receive message again like the POP3, but it's actually more complicated. It is more complicated than POP3. So message are remain in the server. They do not, there's no option like the POP3 whereby it allows a retrieving for the header only, so that you can see the message before you decided to download them. Okay, so here it's not actually existed, but I believe that in the recent versions of IMAP4, because IMAP4 is actually being evolved so rapidly comparing to POP3. So I believe that now, recently, sort of that option is actually possibly existed in the recent versions. So, but talking about like the legacy one here, this is what we are distinguishing here, and I want you to remember this, because the configuration, the comparison here or the description here is talking about like both legacy protocols, either POP3 or IMAP4. So it requires, of course, more space, because this will require that whenever you want to retrieve a message, it has to be completely downloaded, completely existed on your local disk. So users, of course, who are talking about who are expected to receive large data such as images, videos, or music, of course, this will be like a kind of problem for them. So IMAP4 here it uses flags in order to keep track of the status of the message. Several flags, for example, here. So whether the flag here to indicate yes or no, meaning that recent is this kind of particular message is recent or not. So if it is yes, so if the value of the flag here yes, indicating yes, this is the recent. Same goes for the other. So deleted, this message can be pointed as deleted, so yes or no. So it's just a value that each of these flags can hold, so either yes or no. It is to keep track of the status. So here we're talking all like tracking the status of the message. Okay, so the command, when we talk about the command, it's a little bit more complex, and that's why actually IMAP is being pointed as more complex than the POP3. It's because the commands here are not just come in a form of a single, a single keyword. Rather, they are actually being combined together. So, or like for example here, fetch one body. So here we want to say that we want to actually fetch or like receive. So number one, and then we want to receive the body of that command. So fetch here can be used with more than one purpose. So it can be used with the text, which is the body. The body of the text, which is the body of the content, to say, while here we are talking about like the header of the message. So that's why actually fetch body header. So we are actually retrieving the header of the message. So a number one here, it's of course the ID of that letter. We can actually also display a certain number of, a specific volume from the message contents. Like for example here, body text between two brackets, angle brackets. This value, it indicates that we are retrieving the first 60 characters of that message. All right. So common IMAP commands here, of course, you can just, as you are reading here, so these commands are actually being used to like to provide different settings or different configuration. For example, login password, of course, again here, like POP3, the username and password are not actually encrypted, and this is actually a kind of vulnerability. So both IMAP and POP3 are not actually encrypting the like the username and password whenever it's being sent to the server. So select mailbox here, it is just the default mailbox to identify what is the default mailbox to be connected to. Fetch message, it is to retrieve message again, and you can just, for example, say, if we said that item S here, it represents actually the number of the message number. So here, number, like the letter S represent the number of, like the ID of the message. Again here for store, actually it's a store message, so it is changed to flag in order to this command actually to mark a message as to be deleted or like undeleted, or read or unread. Logout, of course, it's to like to stop the session here. So installing, these are the process of like installing the Microsoft Exchange, and we were talking about like that kind of package, or Microsoft Exchange has been defined as the package that includes all these previously discussed protocols in like one suite, and also includes more than that, as we have discussed before. So it's a rich email server that actually supports multiple protocols. As you can see here, all the protocols we discussed are already there. So SMTP, it's already part of IIS. Whenever you install IIS, you do not need to go and configure or install additional settings for an SMTP. So even for the others, actually POP3 and IMAP, they are actually all kind of parts of IIS. So lightweight here, this is a protocol also that actually is being used in the LAN to communicate between the email client, such as Microsoft Outlook, and also the email server. So MS Exchange here, it is actually an example, which is this one actually. It's an example of a package that can run on the email server. Okay, while talking about like Microsoft Outlook here, we actually use that kind of application to like in the email client, those who are sending or receiving, like Gmail. While Exchange server, of course, Microsoft Exchange here, it's just the application or suite that runs on the server itself. So we use a wizard actually to implement the installation. So before the installation, before the installation requirements, there are some tools that need to be installed here. And actually, most of these, it seems that kind of more practical. We will be actually learning this in the practical session more and more. And I think the picture there will be more clearer than like the discussion in here. So I will just pause whatever more description into the back to be later on to be discussed in the practical session. But you need to know that here these are the two tools that we need: network news and transport protocol, and also Active Directory, the known one, in order to make different domains. So what are the technical considerations involved in installing Microsoft Exchange? So these are the things that we need to think of whenever we are actually installing, whenever we are actually involving the dealing or configuring, to say, the Microsoft Exchange. Of course, DNS has to be there, because we talk about like mixing or like configuring or modifying the DNS files by using the MX records, like to indicate the kind of a record to be a message, to be an email server, or like a web server record. So also NNTP and Active Directory and connectors. So they are all actually different considerations. Connectors here, we mean by them is to translate message from one system to another system. And also IMS here, it is to add on to activate. It is just a service that it triggers whether like each of these three protocols to be in use or in duty. Single email subsystem provide distributed email systems, particularly when we talk about like IMAP4. Of course, this is very kind of important trait. So extra features in Microsoft Exchange here, you can just reach them out. For example, unified messaging. We talk about conferencing, audio and video, chatting, as we have discussed that. I think most of these points have been already covered in the previous chapter, but like you can just find like extra details in here that you can like add into your knowledge. Well, so administering Exchange 2000, two software components here are needed. So the first one here is called Exchange System Manager that actually provides a global settings. So for example, here you talk about the internet message format that contains standard MIME that should be actually configured, and also another proprietary for message delivery. So this is actually the Exchange System Manager. It involves with a message delivery and also MIME. The other one here, it is called Active Directory and users and computers, and this one actually concerns about the managing the users to be connected to a specific domains and having an authentication in order to like to move between one domain, or like communicate between one domain to another domain. Messaging delivery proprietaries. Uh, Deliver proprietaries in Microsoft Exchange, it actually have there's actually a messaging delivery proprietaries to say whenever we deliver a message, we can actually make some restrictions or filtering as a purpose. Like as a response into a security implementation to say when we want to implement security in the email server. So message restriction here, it's to restrict different parameters of the message. Filtering here, it's to filter different. When we talk about different parameters, it could be like the message size, the message like who is the sending, who is the receiver. Like limiting or restricting the message to be like within a specific format and to be communicated in a specific way. Filtering here is that you do not want to deliver the message to everyone, so you are just filtering whatever email you do not want in order to deliver that message. So it's useful for eliminating someone who is unwanted, who's sending unwanted email message without commercial message to many of your users. As we have said here, restrictions, it is just the outgoing, it is about restricting the outgoing message size, and this can be also configured here. And I believe that in practice you will find more sense. Like you will find this has more sense than talking in theory here. So but we can say that we can restrict the outgoing and an incoming message size, and also we can restrict who is the receptionist. When we talk about like what can be restricted here, you can restrict the size of the message, as we have said, and also the size of the received message. So the email names and the senders also can be restricted only from who and you're sending to who exactly. Both are actually kind of similar here in the terminology. Well, so now we are moving to Linux. Just now we were talking about like Microsoft Exchange as an alternative for an email package to be used in Windows, but now we're talking about Linux. So here, when we mention Linux, meaning that we are using the sendmail, or about configuring sendmail. So it is only accepting emails, so there is no receive. So it means that it is an MTA, but it's not actually an MDA, meaning that the agent is being activated here. It is an MTA, and this is actually one kind of limitation comparing to Microsoft Exchange. So that's why for that, this kind of package, it only understands the SMTP, the sending protocol. It doesn't understand the other variants, which are the POP3 or IMAP4. So sending email here is used only if users log into the sendmail server. So there is no transfer protocol are needed, because everything will be implicitly performed. So email messages are, because actually here we don't need a transfer protocol. It's because we do not actually send, we are actually only receiving. Okay, so email messages here are resides in a machine users logged on and cannot be actually accessed and cannot be accessed remotely. So we cannot actually make a kind of remote communication with that package. And this is actually this is kind of another limitation to say. It is installed from the package with the extension RPM. Sorry, this is an extension for the Linux-based packages, and more details of the installation can be existed in this page. In fact, we will not be handling like in the lab the installation details. But if you are curious enough, to explore the installation for Linux, you can just reach that out in the textbook. So configuration here of the sendmail has to be configured first using the using a macro processor called M4 by writing this command in order to has to be processed in order to generate what we call the send mail file. So this file is actually enabling it contains all the commands and all the configurations and the settings that allow receiving like a particular email. Installing and configuring IMAP and POP3 in Linux. So both of them have to be actually enabled as an additional daemon. And we need to install an additional package. So by default here, as I want to emphasize, by default, send mail doesn't actually work with the MTA. Okay, so and again here, it's also by default, it's not even activated to use. It is not activated to use like the POP. It's not activated to use the the POP3 and the IMAP4. So in order to make it possible to activate it with the IMAP4, meaning that in order to activate this to be send mail to be able to include the mail delivery agent, it means that we need to install another package that it's called IMAP 2001 in order to enable this, enable send mail to work as a sender and receiver. So these are actually some, the settings here. So it is just by using, it is actually being installed by enabling a daemon. So this is actually a package that is being installed and activated from the daemon. And the daemon here, remember this, it is actually the other term or the description for the service. So the service in Linux, we call it actually a daemon here. So it can be actually activated by editing this configuration file that existed in this directory here, and the configuration file name here is named is xinetd.d, and using this command in order to start and configure or check the configuration of the IMAP. So check config IMAP on, meaning that enable the IMAP, and then you can just restart the service using the command here. All right, so configuring email with the clients. So this is another part of the email system. Just now we were talking about the email server. So now we are talking about the clients. Like those who are receiving the email. So let me just go back again and here. So now what we talk about, like send mail and Exchange, Microsoft Exchange. Of course, they are packages to be configured here in the server, in the email servers. But now, talking about client email, client mail, it is that the Outlook should be configured in here. So Microsoft Outlook and other Qmail, for example, in Linux should be configured in the end user. So now we are talking about the end users here. So let me just retrieve back. All right, so examples here. So Microsoft Outlook, so it's a free, commercialized here. Of course, this is an example of commercialized, not freely available Microsoft Outlook, but another free applications here in Windows. Like for both Windows and Linux, we have Netscape, and Netscape actually it's been used since an old time. Currently, actually, it's not really that kind of common, although people. With that, people are still using Microsoft Outlook, even though it's actually commercialized and they will need to buy it. But it's actually worth it because it provides a lot of functionalities that cope with the technology and the evolution of the email services that are being created that are being developed and contributed to the server, to the email server. So in Linux also we have Kmail, which is freely available in Linux. So Kmail and Netscape and Microsoft Outlook, at the end, they are examples of configuring email clients. So typical information requires in order to make the configuration here, in order to configure the email client. So for example, they need like four main items: SMTP IP address, also your email address, the password, and of course the POP3 or IMAP4 IP address. So Well, here it is actually the SMTP, configuring SMTP. It should be accessed within only users from that belongs to the same domain. Why is that? If you remember, I have been asking, I'm asking this question, and I have also explained the answer just, during the section of the SMTP before. So take a while and think of that answer here, and it's actually very trivial. The answer is that SMTP, as we have said before, it doesn't authenticate. It doesn't authenticate any sender, like any receiver to say. So I'm sending email, but I do not I do not really verify. Like that protocol doesn't allow me to verify who am I sending to, whether his email is actually, like whether this particular ID is valid or not. So that's why it actually requires that whenever there is any configuration for SMTP server, it should be accessed only between users who are belonging to the same domain, or at least linking to the same ISP. So that's why here the case, if you're, for example, trying to access your work SMTP from your home computer, and of course your work SMTP is working in a, meaning that you're trying to access the work computer from the home computer in order to access the email that it's actually identifies at the work computer. So both computers are of course joining different domains, but of course managed by the same as ISP. Talking about the geographical space. Here you need to connect from your home. You're talking about like you are at home and you want to connect to the work email. Here you need to connect to you need to connect to ISP domain, meaning that rather than connecting directly to the home, like from home to work, because this will actually make a kind of vulnerability. Any user within that domain, at the work domain, he can actually be able to impersonate the sender email that you're actually trying to access, and actually take out, try to sniff the data and receive the data. So that's why we connect first to the ISP domain, and then configure the home to work. Configure that home protocol, the protocol of SMTP to work with the ISP SMTP, not actually to work with the work SMTP. And then later on, so we configure the workplace, the PC here in the workplace, to be connected to the ISP. Of course, maybe using the other domain according to the whatever domain the work has been defined. For example, unizwa.edu.om. So this is another domain that has been identified here, because is that ISP here acts as a central point that gathers different domains together in order to connect them using one single unit, or at least using one single platform. So that's why having your data being communicated to the same unit here, of course, you will not have any vulnerability that the others may reveal your connection. All right, so web-based email clients. So these are clients that allow you to communicate, that allows you to access your email service. Like as a client from the internet. You can see that actually in Windows and even in Linux nowadays, we have like Gmail, we have Microsoft Outlook, we have Kmail. So all of these are actually called web-based email clients. So they are actually doing the same process as they are doing the same, or they are delivering the same process or the same features as Microsoft Outlook, as for example the Kmail. So all of these are actually, even like Microsoft Outlook is now having another version of of these of this kind of application. Instead of being a standalone, it is actually a web-based, meaning that you don't need to install any kind of software in your computer. So it can be configured using Outlook Web Access, Exchange 2000. So in order to configure web-based email, and common public web-based email clients here, Microsoft, for example. So these are the publicly used web-based email. They are actually very famous and very well known: Hotmail, Yahoo Mail, and also Gmail, for example. There are actually many advantages. Why do we need to use web-based email clients over the standalone emails that we were explaining just now and here? So as you can see here, you don't need to, because there is a browser that handles everything for you in terms of protocols, in terms of configurations. You don't need to configure, and you don't need to concern about the configuration. So this, of course, the minimize the effort of configuration and also reduces the support cost. So you don't need any kind of expertise to help you with this. Again here, so there is no specialized client software is needed, and users do not require to retrieve email from a specific computer. So here we do not need POP or IMAP. Some of them, they are actually built in, like in the server side, and which reduces, they are actually built in the browser. This actually reduces the server side. So actually the browser here, it's actually been invented to be very sophisticated to handle all of these. So that's why talking about Mozilla, Firefox, or Chrome, Google Chrome here, they actually happen to, like accommodate all of these kind of internet-based settings and protocol descriptions. So again here, so it of course has richer information can be developed, and because there is no restriction to use any kind of particular protocol, so meaning that that kind of email system can be can have a very rich environment to be developed and even extend beyond just being a very basic email. All right, so with that, we are summarizing our chapter that you were discussing about the email services, the different protocols that we were handled that you're handling through the email exchange process, SMTP, POP, and IMAP4. We will also discussing about the structure of the email server packages. For example, Microsoft Exchange and SendMail, they are actually very popular email server products, and talking about like the DNS, how it plays a central role in messaging using the MX record. Also, we were talking about recently about the web-based client email application, and also the standalone application, for example, the Outlook and Kmail. So with that, I would like to thank you for watching, and I hope you can actually retrieve more information from the textbook and open a discussion as you like. Thank you so much.